Hello, packets, protocols, and oh, hang on a second. That's what Mike says. Mike's not here today, but I'm happy to be hosting the show and having everyone come here and talk about application security. This week, we talk with Alvaro Munoz, from GitHub about helping to secure open source software. In the news segment, Great Escape is not always as great as it sounds. Solana crypto security logic is not always as great as intended. Some people's idea of peace isn't as great at all. And some great security suggestions for package maintainers. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
SUSE.io makes security tools for everyone. SUSE's flat rate pricing means you can set up SCA and DAST tools for your whole team. No seat counts, no scan limits, and you never have to talk to a salesperson. SUSE integrates with all common CI/CD platforms and supports most popular package managers. And thanks to SUSE's open source vulnerability scanner, license management suite, and SBOM generation capability, you can get back to what you really want to be doing, coding in no time. Visit securityweekly.com/SUSE.
This is episode 189, recorded March 21st, 2022. I'm your host, John Kinsella, filling in for Mike Shima today, who's out with, taking care of something else, but breaking his almost perfect attendance record. I'm here with Lee Neely. Hey, Lee, how are you?
Oh, good to be here. Happy Monday. Great to sound like we got a fun topic this morning.
We do, and I really appreciate you filling in last minute. And let's get going on that topic. But first, an announcement. Do you have any specific guests or topic that you'd like us to cover on one of our shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review these suggestions monthly, and we'll reach out as soon as you bring that to us. So we do have a great topic this week. We have Alvaro Munoz, excuse me. I'm going to try and get that name right, but bear with my poor Americanism here. Principal security researcher with GitHub Security Lab team. Previously worked with application security consultant, helping top enterprises to deploy their application security programs. He is passionate about web application security, where he has focused most of his research. Munoz has presented at many security conferences, including Black Hat, DEF CON, RSA, OWASP, AppSec, EUN, US, Java 1, and many more, and holds several InfoSec certifications, including OSCP, GWAP, and CISSP. Easy for me to say. Welcome to the show, Alvaro.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure. I've been listening to this show for years now. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's always great to hear, and we're very happy to have you. So you've been working on quite a lot of really great projects, both before GitHub as well as where you are now. So maybe just start off with tell us a little bit about what you've been working on over the last few years and how you got to where you are today.
Wow, few last years. So I've been working on many different things. So probably the research that I'm more famous or known about or known for is probably the JNDI injection that I presented back in 2016. And that's because, we have Log4Shell last December, and that was a JNDI injection. So a vulnerability that flowed basically under the radar for 7 years. Now it's all of a sudden in all the news. So that's probably the one that I'm more known for. Also, I've done a lot of research around Java or unsafe deserialization in Java and other languages. And I have presented other vulnerabilities classes at Black Hat and DEF CON. So now I'm focusing on helping secure open source software. So I have moved more into what can we do as a community to help secure open source that we all depend on, right? So we are doing a lot of stuff, interesting stuff at GitHub, and that's what I'm focusing on right now.
That's awesome. And I suspect that gives you a really great viewpoint to be able to go from initially being a researcher and looking with, how can I break things to how can I fix things. But I think the one question I'd love to start with, And we did cover your work on the show here probably a few weeks ago when Log4j came out, more than a few weeks ago. But one of the thoughts that came into my head when I saw that is, this guy out there on the internet figured this stuff out years ago, and it's just sort of finally really getting attention now. What from your point of view, like suddenly being sort of thrown into the spotlight for work you did years ago, what does that feel like, or what sort of thoughts came into your head around that?
Well, my first idea that came to my head was like, we really did something wrong if the Log4j developers didn't know about all these JNDI injections. I felt like we had failed them to make this vulnerability class more popular, more known by the developers. So that was like my first idea, how this vulnerability could be hidden in Log4j, which is such a popular logging framework for Java, without no one knowing the risks of having such JNDI lookups integrated into the logging framework. So I think that the problem was that, well, in one hand, we have like many developers, like thousands of them, knowing about Log4j lookups, knowing about Log4j features, and only a few bunch of security researchers or security engineers knowing about JNDI injections. And sadly, there was no overlap, someone that really know about those features in Log4j and the JNDI injections potential to lead to remote code execution. So that's what my first impression was, like how this was found like 7 years after we presented that. Mm-hmm. And what said that there was few people like knowing about JNDI injection. We presented that back in 2016, but it was probably known before, because I remember that the initial idea that led to this research that we presented at Black Hat was that a malware sample that we were analyzing at that time was using JNDI, not abusing JNDI in this way, or not finding a JNDI injection, but actually leveraging JNDI to install or to bypass, if you remember, the Java applet click-to-play protection. So they use JNDI to bypass that protection. And when I read about that and I tested it myself, I was like, well, so if anyone can pass untrusted data into a JNDI lookup, that is going to be very bad. And then we started that research. So yeah, malware authors knew about that like years before. So
interesting. We finally found out about it. It seems like, I don't know, correct me on this and go throw that out there and see if I'm close to accurate or not. When you have a language which is being designed and developed for really an enterprise workspace or an enterprise organization where, and it's the same thing we see in standards, whether it's security standard or, any other protocols. You need so much flexibility to have everyone has all these different use cases of what they want to do with this thing, that by the end you end up with something that is amazingly complex and has all sorts of edge cases and how it can be used in malicious intent, sort of like that click to run. Would you agree with that statement, or?
Yeah, so that's basically the root cause of so many vulnerabilities in Java language and also in other enterprise programming languages, because basically, if you think about it, what was the need to add JNDI lookups to a logging framework? Well, probably a couple of developers thought that was a good idea to be able to look up information from these naming services, but that shouldn't have been like a default lookup installed by default. Actually, that should have been like an opt-in feature, and because there is so many powerful features in Java, like for example JNDI. Well, it's a naming service, but because it's basically a storing and retrieving Java objects, that means, or that implies, that you are dealing with deserialization and serialization of Java objects. And we all know that deserialization can lead to remote code execution. So you have to be very careful when you use or you enable these powerful Java protocols because under the hood, they have a lot of power because they were coded in maybe some years where it was not, security was not it was like an afterthought. So, well, JNDI is a good example of that. It's by default, by design, is vulnerable to remote code execution. It's never meant to take untrusted data. And that's what we presented back in 2016.
Yeah. It reminds me of... Go ahead, Lee.
So I was just thinking, it sounded like it wasn't just a matter of increasing features because this would be useful to this group and adding this, but doing it the right way and not enough. Did I hear you say they really weren't enough aware of the added capability in the JNDI space so that when they enabled the feature, they just left the door open for exploit?
Yeah, so I want to be fair with the developers of Log4j. So this feature was introduced in 2014. That was 2 years before we presented that research at Black Hat. But if you think about security in depth, even though if you don't know that JNDI can lead to remote code execution, even if you don't know that, well, unsafe Java unsafe deserialization was not such a big thing in 2014. Actually, I think it started becoming like a trend in 2015. So 1 year after that, when they were developing this, they make this. Well, if you look at the implementation of how JNDI lookups work in Log4j, they are taking into account that there can be 2 different lookups, like one for relative paths and one for absolute URLs. So there was no single reason to allow a logging framework to perform an outbound connection to an arbitrary URL. So even if you don't know that could lead to remote code execution, if you perform like more security in depth, you should have not allowed outbound connection from JNDI connections or JNDI lookups at that point, even if you don't know about the potential impact of JNDI lookups. So yeah, I think that when coding this kind of new features, you have to think about what can go wrong. I mean, is it okay to allow anyone that can control some string that is logged into or with Log4j to perform outbound connection? Can that be used to, for example, leak environment variables? Even if there is no JNDI or remote code execution vector, you can always use that to leak sensible information, like for example.
Yeah, it's as we add more functionality into something, that frequently, as soon as something comes even a little more complex, you're giving yourself a chance to sort of shoot yourself in the foot. So, Java deserialization has caused all these type of issues. I think you've done a little bit of work with .NET as well on that sort of aspect of things. But what sort of, from your current position where you are now, you've switched from the researcher and that type of thing to actually try to figure out how to help people identify and be able to at least have a sense of what's going on. So maybe I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing there with CodeQL.
Yeah, so, well, we are helping developers in trying to write secure code. Well, not all developers, but especially focusing on the open source developers that don't have like an organization behind them, like the developers that write the open source small libraries that we all use and that so many enterprise code depends on. And we are like writing some blog post series aiming on trying to help them grow this mindset, like what we just explained, like should I allow outbound connections, for example, if that's not the purpose of these kind of lookups. So trying to build this security mindset that is not an easy thing to do. And developers normally have other things in mind, like they have to like write and support new features, and they are not really caring about, well, what are the abuse cases that someone can try to abuse this library. So yeah, we are doing that in a number of ways, like writing blog posts. We are helping open source developers by we are going to host even some office hours for them. And one of the ways that we are a small team, maybe like 6 researchers now, obviously trying to find vulnerabilities in all the high-profile open source projects is kind of impossible. It's not going to scale. So one of the things that we do is try to share our methodologies, also very detailed advisories, the same advisory reports that we send to the maintainers, we share them with the community later, so we can help also security researchers know about what we are doing and how we did that and how we found those vulnerabilities. And as I said, also share our methodology and tooling. And one of the main building blocks of that tooling is CodeQL, which is a static analysis tool, which is free and can be used by any open source maintainer to find vulnerabilities in their source code. We use it a lot in the GitHub Security Lab, not just as a way of finding vulnerabilities in a kind of automated fashion, like integrating, for example, CodeQL in the CI/CD pipeline, but also to help you during a manual code review, to assist you as a kind of interactive oracle that you can ask questions to the code base that you are reviewing and try to focus your review efforts on the parts that are more critical for the application. So again, we share a blog post about how we use it, how we leverage CodeQL in those other use cases, like doing variant analysis, manual code review, etc. And we are sharing that with the community in the hope that we can try to scale our efforts into the community.
Wow, that's
Question
really great.
for you.
Go.
So I was thinking you're sharing tools and techniques with the community. Are you seeing anything come back where somebody says, hey, I created this thing, I think it'd be cool for the rest of the community? And the second half of the question is, are you getting anybody in the community stepping up to say, hey, can I help it the same way you're helping everybody else? Or is that still future hope?
No, well, we are actually hosting a bug bounty program. So if the community, for example, writes a CodeQL query that they use to find vulnerabilities either in their source code or maybe in their organization code or whatever, they can send us those. And actually, we are paying them a bounty, an award for contributing them. And actually, just to give an example, a couple of years back, some author that I don't remember the nickname, but he shared and he contributed a JNDI or a CodeQL query to find JNDI injections. I think he was rewarded around $3,000 more or less. And that query today, if you adjust the sources to account for log4j sources, that same query finds log4shell. So that was a contribution that was led by the community. And as that one, we have like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 contributions every week. So yeah, the community is contributing back. We are promoting that by having this bug bounty program. And also we have even seen like companies like GitHub customers that are using like CodeQL internally that are also contributing back to the public community by contributing things that they develop for them, for themselves, for their companies. So yeah, that's great. And that's one of the things that I love from this work, from this job, that there is all of these community engagement and contributions.
Yeah, it's for those who haven't experienced it, once you get into an open source community and it starts grabbing a little bit of traction, and like you get a group of folks together that are there purely for the love or the interest in working on a topic together, it's a very cool feeling. And I want to make one comment from before about when you were talking about the other use cases for CodeQL. I'm not sure I thought of it yet for doing code reviews. I used to do professionally a security code review for large institutions, and like my trick was, it's billable hours, but usually it's billable hours, but usually you only have like a certain time period to actually get the work done, so you are trying to rip through it pretty quickly. And my trick was to have like a file with like my favorite greps, which I'd grep through source code looking for hotspots or places that want to dig in a little bit deeper, like inserts or selects or things like that. Being able to do that with CodeQL would be amazing. So at least personally, I think that's a great use case. So I think that's going to help a lot of folks.
Yeah, actually, I will have a blog post that I wrote a couple of months ago about how I found like 10 or 12 different remote code executions on a framework that is called Apache Dabo. And in that blog post, I shared this methodology of using CodeQL like to assist or to empower this manual code review, how to focus, how to find the attack surface, how to identify where untrusted data is entering the application, how to find these hotspots that you mentioned, like where in the application I'm doing things like unsafe or deserialization, no matter if they are safe or unsafe. And as you said, grep was something that I was also using in the past, but this is much more powerful. Like, for example, just to give you an example, in this particular framework, there was an unsafe YAML deserialization. But in order to perform an unsafe YAML deserialization with a snake YAML, you need to configure the YAML parser in a specific way, right? So grepping for just YAML parsing operations is not enough. You need to account for how those are parsed. And using CodeQL is very easy to just look for hotspots, like tell me all the places in the application where unsafe YAMLs parsings or deserializations are happening, but just focus on those that can lead to remote code execution, for example.
Yep, cool. So as developers are looking to use CodeQL or come up to speed with something like this, any additional tips about how they can? I mean, it's tricky how, and it could just be some of your blog posts you might want to mention. But as you come into a new language like this, whether it's JNDI or SQL or CodeQL, there's always a bit of a learning curve of like how do I quickly get up to speed with something like this while I'm trying to get the rest of my job done, right? It's usually we're not paid. Unlike you, we're not lucky enough to be paid to go and study CodeQL. So how can folks sort of get up to speed with something like this quickly? What do you think is the easiest way?
I think that one of the best ways is to play with it, not trying to find like security vulnerabilities, but just try to play with CodeQL and see the power of using queries to query your code base. You don't have to look for specific vulnerability patterns, maybe just, I don't know, all the Spring controllers or something. When you are looking at your application, or maybe some application that was not developed by yourself and you want to become familiar, you can use CodeQL for that. We also have a lot of learning labs at GitHub, like one at least for one of the languages that we support. So that's also a very good way of learning CodeQL, because we start from very simple queries and we start building like more complex predicates to find like more complex patterns. But the idea is that CodeQL is a declarative language. If you're familiar with SQL, there are a lot of things that are similar, and is a logical language. So it may be a little bit daunting at first time, because, well, probably most of the developers are more familiar with imperative languages like Java or Python or whatever, where you tell them how to do things, like, I don't know, iterate through this for loop, and for each of the elements do this and that. And CodeQL is more like a declarative language where you specify what you want. Like in SQL, for example, you said, I want all the users and the username and maybe the last name and the birthday for the users with ID 123. So you specify what, and CodeQL is exactly the same. You specify what you want. You need to become familiar with the syntax, but the IDEs, VS Code extension, for example, are very helpful to help you with autocompletion, etc. You can very quickly find what you want to do. And yeah, so I guess that the resources that you were asking me for, probably the more useful ones are the learning labs in GitHub. So CodeQL learning labs.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. So, and I think you guys are looking to bring in some additional team members, if I got my notes right. So when you're looking to hire someone or expand that team, or even just bring people into the community, let's go a little more widespread with our net. What are you looking for in that person? Are you looking for someone who knows CodeQL, or is it someone who has just got like either a security or a coding background? What from what you've seen so far, what makes someone a good fit to help out with that?
Well, that's a good question. So yeah, it's true. We are setting up a new team that is going to focus on triaging CodeQL alerts and in open source libraries and frameworks. So to help the open source community to find vulnerabilities, basically. And this is going to be a junior team. So most of them are going to be right out of college. So what I'm really looking for in these candidates is passion about application security. I want them to have this passion about how things work. And for that, I don't necessarily need for them to know CodeQL. That's something that they can learn here. That's at GitHub. That's no problem. I don't care about having a master in cybersecurity, especially because most of the curriculums for these masters are focusing on other aspects of security, things like forensics or malware analysis, or like maybe a SOC analyst or things like that. But I've seen very few masters with curriculums, including things like code review, understanding code, and looking for vulnerabilities in code. So what I'm really paying a lot of attention to is people that love security. And in order to see that, I'm looking for people that play CTFs, for example, that play CTFs in a team that are familiar with the latest vulnerabilities, that proves that they want to stay on top of what are the latest vectors, techniques, etc. And I don't really care if that's my personal case, but I'm looking for passionate security young people rather than like people with an academic background. But obviously, we find someone that has that that academic background, as long as they are passionate about security, that's fine. Those are kind of the indicators that we are using right now. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's about every single person in case by case, I guess.
One of our listeners just said, "Hey, that's me for sure. He checked all my boxes, but I'm not young." So, are you looking purely for the college grads, or?
Well, now we are hiring just junior ones, but we are happy to talk to you if you want to help secure open source, of course.
It's this type of thing. It never hurts to throw your resume in there. You see who you'll actually connect with, or maybe you guys will come back and be in touch and find a position a few years later. That's really interesting from the point of view of, I've got my favorite interview questions I ask people too. And you're coming close to one or two of them. Like, I really like asking people, how do you like to learn? How do you do that? Do you go and play with labs at GitHub, or do you read a book, or we all have our different styles. It's a good way to learn about people. But looking at, when I see CTFs on someone's resume, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But I never actually thought of it as a really strong signal. But I think you've got a really interesting point there. Before we wrap up, I had one question I wanted to ask, and I don't want to jinx you up, but at the same time, we've talked about injections and SQL injection and JNDI and some of the other languages out there like the YAMLs and things like that. What does CodeQL do to make sure that you guys don't have some sort of injection issues in the future?
Well, basically with CodeQL, you can just model, basically dump the security knowledge that security auditors and researchers have. And you can express that in this declarative query language that I explained before. So if you know about all those cases, all those things that should not take untrusted data, if you know about all those methods that can sanitize or validate the data, then you can just basically dump that into a CodeQL query and have CodeQL to accurately identify if injection is possible or not. So I don't know if that was the question.
No, not quite. My question might not be clear, but what are you guys doing to ensure that CodeQL itself won't have a vulnerability like this?
Well, yeah, we actually wrote a CTF challenge for EcoParty last year, where there was a CodeQL injection. But you don't normally take untrusted CodeQL queries and run them. If you can do that, there is no way of escaping out of the CodeQL evaluation engine and run, for example, commands. So what you can do if you can inject something into a CodeQL query, for example, is basically maybe be able to control the query itself and control what elements of the code base can be identified or not. So yeah, I don't think that's something that concerns us a lot, but basically validate input and don't take untrusted queries.
There you go. We've now completed our analysis, our threat analysis for CodeQL. Lee, any questions? Anything else you want to ask Alvaro while we've got him here?
Well, I was wondering, Alvaro, you've got a real deep dive in the Java space. I know there's vulnerabilities in other spaces. How's it going getting as deep in other technologies, other spaces for you? You seem real busy. Have you got time to get as smart elsewhere?
I guess that it takes interest. It takes, for example, this JNDI injection vulnerability class that I found. It was out of reading blog posts about malware. So like reading everything that gets into your hands that can lead to a research ideas. And in particular in Java, I guess that I'm not that an expert, or I don't even consider myself like a security expert on Java. I have done a lot of research around Java deserialization, JNDI, bin validation, and many other categories. But that's basically because that's the language that more enterprises uses, and that's where I was able to get remote code execution vulnerability classes, and it was kind of easy at that time to find these new classes, and that's what grabbed my attention. I've always been interested in any vulnerability class that can lead to remote code execution, and at that time Java was a playground for that. Hopefully it's not the case anymore, but yeah, script injections, Unsafe deserialization, JNDI injections, bin validations, and many others features of Java could lead to remote code execution, especially, for example, with expression languages such as OGNL that was used by Struts, or is used by Struts framework, Spring Spring expression language, etc.
There's so many of them. Go ahead.
So I was wondering, where do you think we're going to see the next? This is just pure speculation, no wrong answer. What are we not looking at? Where should we be looking to avoid the next Log4j, or doing, or whatever? What do you think we're not paying enough attention to?
So what we think, and that's what we are creating this new team, is basically we need to pay attention to all those libraries that are used by hundreds of thousands of developers. Even if at first sight, like Log4j, they should not lead to remote code execution, we are going to start identifying what are the top libraries and applications used by developers, and we are going to focus on running specialized CodeQL scans for them. And by specialized, I mean that we are going to customize the sources, the things. We are going to make sure that we have right models. And what we are going to do is see if we can find the next Log4Shell, but just looking at the topmost used Java and other programming languages, libraries, and frameworks. I have no idea what it's going to look like, but what we want to do is at least focus on the most important ones, and see if we can, get the most out of CodeQL, and then also help not just by running these scans, these customized scans, but also by helping those open source maintainers to improve the security posture, to propose things like having a security policy, having a code scanning configuration, so running static analysis tools on their build pipeline, for example, or running things like Dependabot to identify vulnerabilities in their dependencies. So we are going to help open source maintainers of these projects that so many of us depend on trying to help their security posture, and hopefully we will identify things like the next Log4Shell in these libraries before any others.
That's awesome.
Fingers crossed.
It sounds like you've really got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, we're going to start small and then start growing on as many projects as we can.
Awesome. So for our listeners, if they want to either submit a resume or start working on those labs, is there a single place they should go to, or where's the best place for them to find you guys online?
So you can visit the securitylab.github.com and you will find ways to contact us. And also, if you want to play with CodeQL, if you want to learn CodeQL, like for example doing these learning labs, then you can also feel free to write CodeQL queries, contribute them back to the community, and we will be more than happy to reward you for doing this job and helping, because most of the bug bounty programs pay you when you find vulnerabilities, and what we are trying to do here is pay you when you prevent vulnerabilities from being exploited or from being found. So if you can write a CodeQL query that help the open source community to find vulnerabilities on their source code just at the time that they send the pull request or the commit that introduced them, then we are more than happy to pay you for that.
Yeah, I hope you get a lot of responses and a lot of our listeners go and start working on that, because that's at least to me, I love the sound of that. Alvaro, appreciate your time. I know you've got a lot of looking into that crystal ball to do and a lot more reading to catch up on everything. So appreciate you coming. Also, Lee, thank you for joining us, and our listeners that are hanging out in Twitch and in Discord. We're going to take a break and we'll be back with the news.